Our next performer is Blake Campbell.
Hi everyone. So I'm going to talk a little bit about memorizing poems. I went through a really difficult period last year. I don't want to get into too much detail about it, but basically I got sick of hearing from people. I got sick of hearing people's attempts to sugarcoat the way I was feeling about things, and say like, oh, like this will pass. You're going to get over this. You're going to feel better about things. When I felt like they didn't have any idea what was going on inside of me. And I think that as people we're driven to find solutions for things. It's our first impulse when we see something that's wrong, whether it's something that's happening emotionally with a person or I don't know, a piece of technology that needs to be fixed. We want to make it right. And unfortunately, when you're talking about someone's emotions, that's not always the best approach to take. So I started to read and memorize a lot of poetry because I think that when you write a poem, you don't have to provide any kind of consolation in the end. You don't have to wrap everything up nicely. And the best poems, I think, are ones that present something the way it is, and they don't try to reach for things that may not actually be there. So I started to memorize these poems, and I was very drawn toward poems that have rigid formal structures, that have a steady meter, that have a steady rhyme scheme, because when someone takes an experience out of their life that's very turbulent, and they put this experience into a form in this way, they're containing that experience to some extent. They might not be saying, oh, well, this is going to get better, I'm going to overcome this. They might not say that at all. They might be comparing absolutely nothing but the depths of their own despair in this. But just through the process of taking this experience and containing it within something that's meant to be musical, that's meant to be appreciated by the ear and the eye and the mind, I think that demonstrates a certain mastery of whatever the issue is. So this was very inspiring to me, and one of the poets that I've really gravitated toward a lot in the past year is Hart Crane. Crane was a homosexual during the Jazz Age. He only lived to be 32. He actually committed suicide by jumping off a ship on the way back from a Guggenheim Fellowship in Mexico. He struggled with alcoholism and depression his whole life. He was actually very open about his sexuality in a time when that was not okay, which only exacerbated his problems. A lot of contemporary critics that read Crane kind of focus on his promiscuity and his drinking, which obviously were part of his life, but I find his story inspiring in spite of his failures, because throughout it all he kept producing these incredibly beautifully wrought poems, and kept trying to figure out a way to take the chaos of his life and turn it into something worthwhile. The poem I'm going to recite by him today is called The Broken Tower. It was the last poem that he completed before he committed suicide, and it's a very dark poem. It doesn't offer any kinds of consolation. It's him at the end of his life, after a very difficult time in Mexico, spent trying to work on a new project. He was having, he's feeling this homophobic pressure from his colleagues and his peers to be like everyone else. And he actually had an affair with a woman during this time. So in this poem, he actually associates his own art of poetry with his sexuality. And he says, the way I read the poem anyway, is that his consolation is that by having this relationship with a woman, I'm going to basically sacrifice my art. I can't write poetry anymore, but I'm going to be saved. So it's kind of a problematic message that this poem gives, but I think that that's part of what makes it great, because it's taking, if you consider it within its context, it's taking all of these really terrible feelings that are being forced upon the poet, and it's representing them in a way that's very unique and original, and really trying to make something out of the tragedy of this man's life. Crane is known for being a very difficult poet, and I still have a lot of trouble with him, but he has such an ear for words and the way that words sound, and I think that half of the pleasure of reading his poems is just listening to how these words have been strung together to create something that not only contains the experience that inspired it, but transcends that experience and puts it onto this very high aesthetic plane. So just kind of, so I think that even if you can't understand everything in The Broken Tower on the first listen, you can hear the way that it moves, and you can hear the way that the music of this poem works. One of the things that frustrates me when I hear people criticize poetry is they're always like, I don't understand it. I don't get it. Like, I don't get poetry. Like, I had a bad experience with poetry. To me, understanding poetry is only half of the pleasure of it. I think that the poet Reginald Shepherd, I think partially in reference to Crane, said that you have to learn by hearing the poem before you can understand it. I'm paraphrasing here. But the poem has to give you some kind of pleasure before you completely like, oh, this line means this thing, this line means that thing. And I think that if we taught poetry in that way, and I know there are some people working today who do, that there would be a lot more people that like poetry instead of people thinking, what's the theme of this? Like, what is this poem trying to do? Like, what are the major motifs running through it? So, I'm going to recite The Broken Tower. The Broken Tower. The bell rope that gathers God at dawn dispatches me, as though I dropped down the knell of a spent day to wander the cathedral lawn from pit to crucifix, feet chill on steps from hell. Have you not heard? Have you not seen that core of shadows in the tower, whose shoulders sway antiphonal carillons launched before the stars are caught and hived in the sun's ray? The bells, I say the bells break down their tower and swing I know not where, their tongues engrave membrane through marrow, my long scattered score of broken intervals, and I, their sexton slave. Oval encyclicals in canyons heaping the impasse high with choir, banked voices slain, pagodas, campaniles with reveilles outleaping, O terraced echoes prostrate on the plain. And so it was I entered the broken world, to trace the visionary company of love, its voice an instant in the wind, I know not whither hurled, but not for long to hold each desperate choice. My word I poured, but was it cognate, scored of that tribunal monarch of the air, whose thigh embronzes earth, strikes crystal word in wounds pledged once to hope, cleft to despair? The steep encroachments of my blood left me no answer. Could blood hold such a lofty tower as flings the question true? Or is it she whose sweet mortality stirs latent power? And through whose pulse I hear, counting the strokes my veins recall and add, revived and sure, the Angelus of wars my chest evokes, would I hold healed, original now, and pure, and builds within a tower that is not stone. Not stone can jacket heaven, but slip of pebbles, visible wings of silence sewn in azure circles, widening as they dip the matrix of the heart. Lift down the eye that shrines the quiet lake and swells a tower. The commodious, tall decorum of that sky unseals her earth and lifts love in its shower. Thank you.